Hey everyone, so we made it to week 7. Just wanted to take the time to go over the assignments for week 7. We have chapter 17 in the text this week, and this is going to take a deep dive into trauma, types of trauma, and different types of trauma responses. It's going to relate trauma to the theories that we've learned so far, such as ego psychology and object relations, and also take a look into neurobiology as it relates to trauma. Then you'll have they're all based on trauma, and really this week we're looking at trauma from a variety of different perspectives. Choose one from this grouping here. We're looking at trauma, but as well as grief and bereavement. And then choose one from this grouping here. So you have 3 different groups of articles that you can choose one from. And then we also have the videos for this week. Like I said, we're kind of looking at different types of trauma as well as grief responses that can, have some relation to trauma responses as well in terms of different kinds of defenses that might be put up in response to grief and trauma. Moving on to the discussions for the week. This is your first discussion. You're going to be reviewing the case scenario from week 2, and you are just going to be taking a look at this case with the knowledge that you learned on trauma and trauma responses. You're going to look at it from an individual and community level. So you might indicate some thoughts about assessment related to some of the theoretical frameworks related to trauma, as well as some resources maybe that you would connect this client with. Just briefly describe how you would intervene. So a brief assessment and a brief description of intervention would be sufficient. And then you're going to respond to one classmate and just provide some constructive feedback. So your second discussion this week is going to be a little different. You're going to be essentially pretending that you are writing a letter to another MSW student who is going to be assigned a field placement where they're working with the physically ill or dying patients. So you're going to take what you learned about grief and loss and bereavement and describe to this MSW student some issues that you would assume that they might encounter when working with that client and their family and their team members, and how they could, what's some advice that you might have on helping them deal with some of those issues. So you might describe some treatment methods that you might use in working with these clients and their families. And within this post, I want you to include at least one resource that you think might help them. You can either use some of the resources from learning assignments this week, or if you have another outside resource that you think might be helpful based on what you know about grief and loss, you could include that within your letter as well. And then you will be posting a response post, follow up with at least one classmate and provide some feedback and how that information might have what you think about that information that they provided and how you think it might be helpful for students working with this population. As usual, the initial posts are due by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. and response posts are due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. I hope you find this week helpful. Trauma, grief, and loss are things that you're going to be working with no matter what population you choose to work with, because unfortunately they are things that affect just about everybody within the population. So these are really important things to inform yourself about. We're looking at it from a couple of different perspectives here. You can see how neurobiology comes into play as it relates to trauma. You can see how psychodynamic theory relates in terms of trauma. And as you continue within your education, you'll see how even cognitive behavioral therapy can be effective for working with trauma, acceptance and commitment therapy. Trauma is something that is important for you to keep up with, educating yourself about as you go as a clinician. There are many times that I'm continuously taking continuing education related to trauma, grief, and loss. Because like I said, it is something that no matter what population you work with, whether it be substance use disorders or children or, if you're primarily working with behavioral disorders, like every population that we work with, these are things that people experience across the board. So it's something that we really have to inform ourselves about and continue to inform ourselves about, as well as make sure that we are seeking consultation and supervision to make sure that we are managing our own responses to hearing about trauma, grief, and loss. Because while all of our clients are going to experience these issues, we are going to experience, many of us have experienced trauma. Many of us will and have experienced grief and loss. So we have to also manage our countertransference responses, as well as limit any risk of vicarious traumatization. So, yeah, I hope you find this information helpful, and I hope you all have a great week.